Okay, so people, people are starting to filter in. That's great. For folks joining the meeting, my name is John Guskowski. I'm Government Relations Chairman, co-chair with Connecticut Chapter of the American Planning Association. And we're very happy to be hosting a legislative wrap-up. Second part of this, co-hosted through CCAPA and CAZEO. So before we get to our speakers, who are very, very grateful and excited to have with us, we'll let the representatives from CCAPA and CAZEO say a few words. So we'll start with Rebecca Agar, the president of CCAPA.
Thanks, John. I just wanted to give a quick welcome to everyone and a couple of thank yous. First, thank you, CAZEO, for co-sponsoring this event with us and working with us on the legislation and putting together this great panel for today. I also want to just thank Evan Seaman and the program committee and Robinson and Cole for hosting us today, as well as John and Emmeline Harrigan, our government relations co-chairs at CCAPA, for all the hard work they put into this session. We have been handed quite a lot of work as zoning commissioners and commissions for the next year or so. So I'm excited to get a little more information on the cannabis aspect of things today.
Thank you, Rebecca. And now the president of CAZEO, Robin Newton.
Thanks, John. Yes, thank you everyone for attending today's legislative wrap-up part 2. For those of you who joined us for part 1, welcome back. Thank you to all of our speakers today. We really appreciate you taking the time to give this presentation and help us better understand all of the uses and parts of this new cannabis legislation, as I know lots of our members have questions on. Thank you to Robinson Cole for setting this up, and a big thank you to my co-person, Mike D'Amato, for helping sort of put all of this together. He's definitely been on the forefront of that. I don't think he's jumped on yet, but a big thank you to him. He has helped with the legislation this year, and he's our membership director, so we really appreciate all the work that he did in putting this together. And with that, I'll hand it over.
Thanks, Robin. So before we get into our presentations, I would note that we have there is a Q&A feature on your screens, on your Zoom windows, the lower center of your screen. Q&A. If you have questions throughout the session, please put them in there so people can see them and our speakers can respond as they're able. Let's avoid the chat because that tends to get a little bit distracting, particularly for speakers who are probably in the midst of their presentation. So if you have questions, please put them in Q&A. And so with that, you saw the screen earlier that presented our speakers. We're very grateful and appreciative to have Mohit Agarwal, who is from the Office of the Governor. He's a policy director, as well as Ben Pomerantz and Jackie Kaufman from and I know it's Carmody, but I lost the whole
okay.
Law firm who have been working on this issue for quite a while. And so, well, I think we'll probably kick it off with Mohit and we'll go from there. So all the speakers, thank you very, very much. And I'll get out of the way. Go ahead, Mohit.
Great. Thanks, John. It's great to be here this afternoon. And thank you everyone for this opportunity to present, and thank you for your time in advance. I think it's really important that, we as a state, we have these conversations, we understand, what the bill implies, and we understand what the processes are that, each of our towns and planning commissions and PNZs will be going through over the next, year plus. So I'm gonna have about 10 slides, roughly 10 minutes. It may run just a tad long. And just to signpost a little bit, I'm gonna start with a little bit of background around the licensing structure in the program. I think that's going to help us understand the role of the municipality when it comes to zoning. And then I'll flip over and discuss in some more detail some of the requirements on the towns in terms of zoning. So with that, I'm happy to get started. So let me share my screen. The presentation mode. Okay, so I think we are done with this slide. Let's go ahead and get started with slide 2. And as we all should know by now, adult use cannabis is legal as of July 1. I'm not going to get really deep into the laws around possession. but the possession statutes did change on July 1, and so possession is now legal. The governor signed the act on the 22nd, and that started a number of different timelines that kick in moving forward. And I'll talk about some of those timelines in just a minute. One thing I really want to highlight on this page is the website that you see there on your right, ct.gov/cannabis. This is a cross-agency website that we will be using throughout the rollout of cannabis to really try to keep everyone up to speed on what is going on, no matter which agency is doing it, no matter which commission is taking action. So we really do want folks to be able to really get used to using ct.gov/cannabis. And there in short order, so in the next couple of weeks, you should be able to sign up for an email newsletter and get updates in real time whenever something is posted that is related to cannabis. So just wanted to highlight that for you folks. And kind of on the same topic of resources and to make sure that everyone here understands where you can go to learn more. On the right on this page, you have a snippet of the official guidance put out by the Office of Policy and Management. So that guidance is available on the OPM website. It's on specifically the IGPP, the Intergovernmental Policy and Planning Division website. And it's a pretty reasonable 4-page read and can really help you understand the key sections as they relate to municipalities, which are sections 83, 84, 126, and 148. That being said, I think there's going to be a lot of interest in any number of sections from municipalities and zoning officials. So I'm pretty sure you're going to be reading much more than just those 4. In addition, we in the governor's office and in OPM are trying to do things like this. We really are trying to reach out to different communities which have an interest in and are part of the rollout of cannabis. We're in conversations with CCM and COST. I'm doing a webinar. We're here today with CCAPA and CAZEO. I've spoken to the COGS before, so there's a lot of interest on our end on trying to get the message out, and so definitely reach out to us, but also reach out to these other organizations so that we can all kind of be on the same page in terms of when questions arise and anything else that you may have questions about regarding the legislation. Just very quickly on the legislation, this was definitely a labor of love. Took years of effort from many stakeholders in the legislature. And I'm extremely proud to have been part of the team that drafted this bill in the governor's office, and really proud to have supported the governor in his vision to get this bill over the finish line. It wasn't necessarily easy there at the end, but I think we came across with the best bill in the country. It's a comprehensive piece of legislation, 303 pages at the end of the day, and frankly, it polls is wildly successful with the public. It's got 65% or so approval. So it's a pretty important act. I think there's a lot of support for it. So it's really it comes down to us in state government and then also local government to really figure out how to make this thing work for all of us. All right. So with that, what I want to do with this slide is provide just a very general overview of kind of the scope of this legislation. I'm not going to read all of this. I'm happy to make these slides available if folks want to read through this in more detail. But what you can see here on the left is some of the key areas of the legislation. Possession around the licensing and what kind of products are allowed to be sold in retail sales, erasure of prior convictions. Equity is really big. I'll speak about that in just a second. In a couple of different ways, substance abuse programs, and these other provisions here at the bottom. So there's a lot going on in this bill, and there's a lot of complexity here. So the OLR summary is really helpful. The FAQ that we have posted at ct.gov/cannabis is really helpful. And just raise questions as they come up in terms of some of the details around this bill. So let me go on to just really highlighting at a very high level how cannabis will be regulated in the state of Connecticut. And there's really 3 different pieces here that intertwine, right? So the primary regulator for cannabis is the Department of Consumer Protection. The DCP has now for 5 or 6 years been regulating the medical market. They have a lot of expertise in this area, and they have 2 primary roles. The first role is the issuance of licenses and permits for cannabis establishments, and I'll provide a little bit more detail on what kind of establishments those are in just a minute. But that's kind of the front end regulation. There's going to be ongoing regulation as well of those establishments in terms of making sure we understand their ownership structure, making sure that they're complying with tax laws. So a lot of those ongoing regulatory authorities lie with DCP. And then a second really important role for DCP is that they are the ones who will be regulating the safety and the type of products available for sale. And so that's critical. There's a lot of detail in the bill. There's a lot of discussion with the legislature on product types, on product safety. And those authorities are provided to DCP to keep us and keep the public safe. The second entity here that is an important part of the regulation of cannabis is the Social Equity Council. So the Social Equity Council is a new state body. 11 or so of those members have been appointed as a 15-person commission, so a few more appointments to come. And they will be meeting in short order in the next few weeks to really launch their work. The Social Equity Council has two sides to their work. The first side is establishing social equity applications or reviewing and approving social equity applications. And so social equity applicants are, they have some special rules around access to licenses, access to capital, and the Social Equity Council is kind of the gatekeeper to make sure that individuals applying for those licenses, meet the rules for eligibility. And then the second part of the function of the Social Equity Council, a little bit less regulatory in nature, but they will be standing up programs to support cannabis entrepreneurs who qualify as social equity applicants, and they will be setting up programs that support DIAs. Those are the disproportionately impacted areas. So those are areas that are defined in the legislation as the roughly 20% in terms of population, but the 20% of the state that's been most harmed by the war on drugs. And then some of the programs that the Social Equity Council will launch will support neighborhood programs in the DIAs. Things as broad as small business startup support, Boys and Girls Clubs, after school programs, et cetera. And so Social Equity Council really has a broad focus. It's not just cannabis, and they really do want to support these communities that were harmed by the war on drugs. An allocation of revenue has been made in the bill, revenue from the taxes from cannabis towards the Social Equity Council, and those are the revenues that will help support some of these programs. And then lastly, I think most importantly for this group, is that the regulation of cannabis really drives or really requires a very, very strong partnership with municipalities. Municipalities have two strong roles here, the siting or the zoning of establishments, and then and the siting or establishing locations for public consumption. There are going to be many other angles that municipalities are interested in, including education, including impaired driving, policing. So there's lots of stuff here for municipalities to really sink their teeth into, but these are the two most important, I think, for this group for us to talk about today. There are on this slide, 11 different types of cannabis establishments that were established in the bill. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will highlight a couple that are most important. So first, a producer is someone who is currently in the market growing cannabis for the medical industry. The law allows them to maintain that license type, but then also start growing for the adult use market. A cultivator is someone who grows only for the adult use market. A micro cultivator is a cultivator with only 2,000 to 15,000 square feet of cultivation space. Out there on the small side, it's a lower cost operation, and there's a separate license type for them. And then on the right there, we have a couple of different types of retailers. What we call just a plain old retailer is what we think of as just an adult use cannabis store. That's where someone can walk in, someone of legal age, and purchase cannabis there. A hybrid retailer, actually back up. A dispensary is one of the current 18 facilities in the state of Connecticut where a medical cannabis consumer, so a patient, can go and purchase cannabis. The law allows them to convert over into what is called a hybrid retailer. A hybrid retailer is a retailer that has both a medical dispensary side and an adult use sales side. And then lastly, there's a delivery service. And so there will be services licensed that can take product from a retailer or a hybrid retailer or a micro cultivator and deliver to a consumer. Let me just check the questions. So Lynn, the question about DCP and HVAC, yes, that is definitely one of the questions, one of the areas of regulation that DCP will review. Okay, and then I just want to provide a very, very high-level overview of how the licensing process will work. I think this will be really helpful for zoning officials as they need to understand where they kind of slot in the process. The vast majority of licenses will be issued through a lottery process. That's because there are just going to be far more applicants for these applications, for these licenses, than the state will be able to process in any reasonable amount of time. So we will have a lottery process in place. And then those lottery winners, once they're selected, will be reviewed by DCP, and if they were applying for a social equity license, by the Social Equity Council. And that review will then result in the issuance of a provisional license. That's the point. Once a provisional license is approved, that is the point in time where you'll start seeing some activity at the local level. because that's when these provisional licensees will try to secure siting. And that's when they will try to start constructing the building, creating the business plans. And they have 14 months to get everything in order and come back to DCP for final approval and to convert that provisional license into a final license. So that's kind of the timing here. And the next slide includes a little bit more detail around this. I'm not going to go through this all right now, but just to highlight for folks, really the winter, so early winter of this year, to say December, is really the first time I would anticipate any kind of zoning action happening, any kind of applications being submitted to your towns. And really a lot of that action is going to happen in spring of 2021. So there will be action at that point. There will be provisional licenses out, and there will be some zoning action. And we anticipate, fall of 2021. So sometime in the latter half of 2022, latter half of 2022 for the market to really open in earnest. And so until then, we're going to be having applicants, going through the process, applying for zoning, building their buildings, but we don't anticipate the market to really open until the latter half of 2022. Questions again. And so Lynn, I'll answer that question when I get to it, which is right now. So in terms of licenses, there is no global cap on the number of any specific license type. So that's really important. The perspective that we took in drafting the legislation is that we want this market to function. We don't want to put artificial caps on licenses. So the only caps that we have in place are the caps on how many licenses we as a state can really process in any reasonable amount of time. I would anticipate over the next 5 to 10 years that we would drop the lottery process in total and move fully towards just first come, first serve, because at that point in time, the number of applicants for the lottery, the number of individuals interested in entering the market should be very manageable. So let me talk about the cap in the bill. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
I just wanted to ask for some clarity on that question. The number of licenses, and you'll probably get to this too. Are you looking to do it in a geographically diverse way? I know that was a standard that was established as part of the medical license lottery. That you're looking for equitable distribution throughout the state. Does that remain?
So not directly. There is no role for the Department of Consumer Protection in terms of saying, we're not going to approve this license because there's too many in any given region of the state. We are not doing RFPs, so we don't have that kind of process in place. That's actually a perfect segue to the second bullet point, which is that is the role of the towns. It is the role of the towns and the zoning commissions to really put forward what they are comfortable with when it comes to density in their towns. And if towns are uncomfortable with having multiple retailers in any area, then that needs to be in your zoning regulations. That is not something the Department of Consumer Protection will be doing for you. One thing we are doing in the statute is putting a cap on the initial number of retailers and microcultivators, and this cap applies separately to each type. So number of retailers and microcultivators in each town, and that 1 to 25 gets rounded up. And so a town like Torrington with about 35,000 people will have, this cap means you would have up to 2 retailers and up to 2 microcultivators. There is no cap on the number of hybrid retailers, in part because we at the state just did not anticipate that being a particularly sexy license type. That's going to be something that the existing dispensaries convert over into, but we did not anticipate there being high demand for additional licenses in that category. So we would really anticipate most of the new licenses coming in for adult use retailers and some on the microcultivator side. A microcultivator can not only just grow, they have a small grow facility, they are allowed to sell what they grow to the public. So they are a type of retailer in addition to being a type of cultivator. And then lastly, I know there's some interest in understanding revenues for the towns. The towns do have a 3% municipal sales tax. It is a new form of revenue that towns haven't had before. And roughly, rule of thumb, an adult use retailer can bring in about $5 million in annual revenue. So that's about $150,000 in municipal tax revenue for each retailer that is cited in the town. So that's rough rule of thumb. So take it with a grain of salt, but hopefully that'll help folks as you go about your planning. All right, let me come to these questions in just a minute. So last couple of slides. So zoning authority, we've kind of hit on some of these already. Municipalities in this bill have broad zoning authority over cannabis establishments. They may prohibit the siting of cannabis establishments of any type of them. They may reasonably restrict hours and signage, for an after signage and First Amendment law, and they may restrict proximity to the kinds of institutions and locations that we're all kind of familiar with. There are towns that don't have zoning ordinances in place, zoning regulations, and for that reason, this section of the bill, section 148, was written to refer to not just zoning, but also municipal ordinances. So towns can do this through zoning or through just a regular town ordinance. So that's kind of a funky feature here. So there's multiple ways of getting at kind of the same feature. And the hierarchy, as I understand it, and as my intention was in drafting that section of the bill, is that zoning is down here, and then towns are up here. And so if a town council or representative town meeting, establishes their own citing rules separate from the zoning commission, then the town's rules are the ones that apply. But at the same time, I think it's going to be the strictest one kind of carries. So we're going to have to work through some of those complications. But frankly, you're going to have to we're going to have to think through some of those. But I think the strictest rule carries, whether it's established by the town, city council, et cetera, or whether it's established through the P&Zs. And then lastly, as we just talked about, we have these caps on retailers and micro cultivators. Those caps are not enforced by DCP. They are solely enforced through by the towns. And what that means is that towns have to use a special permit process for any cannabis establishment who wants to apply. And that special permit process is not necessarily designed to require a public hearing or go through those steps, but simply for the town to understand who is applying, who is in order, and that way you can make sure that you're under the cap that you're allowed under the law. And then lastly, public consumption. So this is outside of zoning, but still a municipal authority. And the Act has multiple different ways of regulating public consumption. There's basically three ways that I dictated here. One is the town. The second is the Clean Indoor Air Act, which is a state law. And the third is there's a law specific to state lands, parks, and waters. Just highlighting that smoking and vaping of cannabis, the kinds of practices that lead to secondhand smoke, are treated differently in the bill than ingestion of cannabis. Just want to highlight that for you. So towns can certainly, in the first, this first bullet point here about determining public consumption for on publicly owned or controlled land, towns can control, ingestion of cannabis on owned or controlled lands, but in general, we anticipate most of the activity around the regulation of public consumption to be on smoking or vaping. Okay, so that's what I have. I believe I've gone over, so apologies for that. I'm happy to answer questions now, or I suspect that other speakers may be able to answer them in due course as well. So perhaps we should wait towards the end.
All right, why don't we turn it over to I think Jackie is going to go first, or I don't know if Ben is going to go first. But to Jackie and Ben, and perhaps they'll answer some of the questions in the course of their presentations. And if there's any loose ends at the end, we can tie them up then. So Jackie and Ben, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Ben, would you like to give your overview, and then I'll go back into zoning? I think that when he gave a very wonderful overview of that, of the bill, and there are sections of his presentation that speak to both of us. So Ben, I can defer to you first, if you'd like. You're on mute.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank everybody for coming today. I would like to just quickly share my screen as well, and then we can pop in and out. I think that a lot of what we're going to cover will answer a lot of the questions. So as we said before, just keep on typing your questions in, and we'll try and cover them as we cover various topics. Jackie and I are partners here at Let's see if we can get this up and running here. And we have a cannabis practice group. It's multidisciplinary, and we have attorneys that handle every side of the industry, including the zoning, land use, and real estate side. We actually got into it back when dispensaries were first opening up in 2012, doing the zoning stuff there. So let's run through things. Again, thanking you, Mo, for his part of this presentation. And I am here with Jackie. So let's get into it. First, when I meet with any client or talk to anybody, I try to start with the conflict of law issue. And that's just to understand that in the state of Connecticut, we have different rules than federal law. So what happens here stays here. Nothing can be transported over state borders. You can't grow something in another state and sell it here, or vice versa. And that is because of the Controlled Substances Act. Cutting to the chase, Schedule I drugs are drugs that have no beneficial or medical purpose. And currently, as of the date of this presentation, cannabis or marijuana is considered a Schedule I drug. Therefore, federally speaking, it is prohibited, can't be sold or consumed, ingested, traded, grown, anything. That said, with this lovely new act that we have here in Connecticut, our state has taken matters into its own hands and created a market within the state of Connecticut. But I remind my clients, and I would remind everybody here, that there still is the conflict of law. So always keep that in mind. If we're doing stuff within the state of Connecticut, we have one set of rules, but anything that involves going over state lines has a different set of rules and considerations. So just keep that in mind. As Mo said, there's 9 new cannabis licenses that were created by the recent act and 2 existing licenses. We have the variety of cultivations, cultivator and micro cultivator, all the ones we discussed. Producer and dispensaries are the 2 existing types of licenses. And I just mentioned that so that we can use the same terms here today. Authority for municipal regulation, and Jackie, please jump in if there's anything that you want to add. But Section 184 of the new Cannabis Act allows a municipality by amendment to zoning regulations to either prohibit the establishment of cannabis businesses or establishments, establish reasonable restrictions regarding hours and signage, or to establish restrictions in the proximity to other establishments listed in 3046, which is a liquor licensing statute. And as Mo discussed, that references certain sensitive locations like schools, churches, charities, hospitals, veterans hospitals, and so forth.
Ben, I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to let you know, it looks like your slideshow is not in slideshow mode right now. So I don't know if everybody's seen all of the slides that you're referencing. You may want to just go ahead and make sure that's launched, or that's you're sharing what's intended.
Thank you. Thank you.
No worries.
I'm toggling through and it says screen sharing, but let's make sure that this works. Hold on. Are we getting it now?
We're just seeing the PowerPoint presentation right now with
Clipboard mode.
yeah, just with the clipboard view there next to it.
Okay. Well, let's fix that.
And then if you want, go ahead in the upper left-hand corner where it says display settings.
Yeah.
From that drop-down menu. So one more
Middle.
over there.
Middle.
Oh. So at the top here, you'll see display settings. You'll see show taskbar, display settings, and in slideshow up towards the top.
Okay.
And then if you click display settings.
This just goes to show that we can write legislation, but we still can't. But we still don't have IT power.
Yeah, no.
I tell you what, I'm requesting control. If you give it to me real quick, I'll go ahead and make the needed change. No worries.
Yeah, and I'll carry on because I know what I was going to say. What we have is the ability for states to regulate by a variety of different means, through statute or through public referendum. But by statute or regulation, we're talking about a variety of different things. You can, as Mo said, regulate where or in what zones these businesses should fall, the proximities that they would fall within other sensitive uses, just like any other zoning. We'll get into that in a second. There also can be bans or moratoriums. Are we good here, everybody? Look at that. Bans or moratoriums on the any new incoming cannabis business. And we're actually seeing a lot of that, as we saw when things first started with dispensaries. A lot of municipalities are going the way of the wait and see, pending. And then finally, as discussed, there can be a public referendum, which the voters within a municipality can have a say as to whether anything comes in or not. So
I'm going to pause you there because I think that's important to know about that, because time is critical of this, is there are a lot of municipalities having a local election. So a municipality has to hold that referendum on whether or not to allow certain cannabis sales, and that is regulated by Board of Selectmen or other similar body. And that has to be 60 days before a regular election. So the alternative, which I know you and I will speak to in a moment, which is to either opt out or to create some type of local legislation. We're seeing a lot of that activity now. You're probably all starting to see that in your municipalities, because that will determine, one, if the recreational sale of cannabis in that municipality will be allowed, or two, if the sale of marijuana in one or more of the cannabis established license types could be permitted. So that you have some flexibility there. I know not you necessarily as zoning officials, but your municipalities do. And that if the elections are in November, then this public referendum option would have to come up fairly quickly if your other local regulatory planning and zoning boards are not taking that up.
Jackie's exactly right. And as this slide shows, you have that 60-day time period explained here. And then in addition, the act specifically says, or gives you the language that should be posted on the ballot. So that smaller font there on the bottom is the specific language that should be published on the ballot should there be a referendum in any particular municipality. So we have bans, moratorium, zoning regulations, and public referendum. Referendum is in section 83, one of the earlier sections dealing with these issues. In the new act.
And also in that section, what's interesting, if it is permitted, if it is either permitted by this referendum or otherwise, that for up to 30 days after the opening of any retail establishment or a hybrid retailer, that the municipality can charge that retailer for any necessary or reasonable cost. So as a zoning enforcement officer, this may be interesting to you, because if there are public safety issues that come up, such as traffic, if it's a very exciting new spot and it creates some type of traffic or other type of public safety costs, such as a police officer that's necessary to direct traffic, that's could be a fine, or it's not really a fine, but that fee could be asked of the actual retailer, but it can't exceed $50,000.
The long story short, charge the retailers $50,000 in the first 30 days. We'll get to that because that's a lesson learned from other states. I just want to quickly cover what can't change. So what can't be changed by the act? Any cannabis establishment already allowed in a municipality can't be affected by public referendum, okay? No municipality has the ability through zoning statutes or regulations to prohibit the delivery of cannabis through a delivery service into its municipality to either consumers or patients. When I say consumer, I mean an adult user, and a patient is someone covered under the Palliative Use of Marijuana Act, or PUMA. Again, we can restrict hours, zoning, and signage of the establishment, but any of these restrictions shall not apply to an existing establishment that does not convert to a new license type. And I know we had some questions because the conversions, the date of conversion it's in effect as of July 1, 2021. So anyone who does own a dispensary can right now put in an application to become a hybrid retailer. I think the question is that sort of putting the cart before the horse if we don't know if your municipality is going to have any regulations regarding hybrid retailers, because in that instance, you would be converting to a different license type. And the question becomes, what is the municipality going to be doing about that new license type? In this situation, a hybrid retailer, because you're both servicing medical and adult use clients. Now, what Jackie was just saying, lessons learned. I just actually was meeting with the chairperson for the Cannabis Commission in Massachusetts. Massachusetts had something called host community agreements. You might have heard of these. These were statutorily permitted contracts between the municipalities and the cannabis entities coming into the municipalities, allowing the municipalities to charge various different amounts. And often, because it was a contract despite statute, the municipalities would charge whatever they wanted. I think the lesson learned is that process is not conducive. It doesn't help to keep things above board. Transparency is best and uniformity is best. So what we've done is exactly what Jackie just stated. Up to in the first 30 days of a hybrid retailer opening in any municipality, you can charge $50,000. That's the maximum, but police presence, traffic, whatever it may be, consider it, because it's allowed by statute, and that's section 83D.
As a public safety cost.
Exactly. So now let's talk generally. Generally, if a municipality has no set zoning standards for cannabis establishments, then they are treated as if any other similar use other than a cannabis establishment under zoning. And as we sort of saw with the proximity regulations, and our understanding from the governor's office is that the governor, the drafters of this bill really intended for the closest similar use to be liquor retail. So I think that's also why we get the distance and referring back to liquor permits and licenses. As Mo pointed out, so I'm not going to take too much time on it, retailers and micro cultivators, so not cultivators or hybrid retailers, but just retailers and micro cultivators are required under the new Cannabis Act to obtain a special permit or other affirmative approval. I just want to clarify, micro cultivators are, I think, from 2,500 to 10,000 square feet, and then they can increase by 5,000 square feet on, I think, on an annual basis until they get up to the point of big scale cultivators. So that is where we stand now. However, we also already have certain municipalities who are talking about special permits for other sorts of uses. Just talking about changes, should you start to enact or draft new zoning regulations dealing with these new sorts of licenses, which obviously until June 22nd of 2021 didn't exist, hybrid retail, cultivation, product manufacture, packaging, food and beverage. Note that any zoning official of your municipality has an obligation to report those changes, and there are time frames for reporting. Sorry for the, I see that there's an issue in the, it's RERACA, section 184B is the provision of the statute that talks about having to report any new zoning changes.
And if may I, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Looks like you're going to deal with this slide, it's fine.
So now we're going specifically to the language of zoning, and the language of the zoning language, which is in section 148 of the Act, states that unless otherwise provided by a municipality through zoning regulations or ordinances. And again, there's not very many, I don't think, we'll talk about we've created a database and a tracker for different municipalities to see, to keep track of what zoning ordinances currently say, changes that are being made, bans or moratoriums that are being put into place. I don't think I've seen any so far that talk about the new forms of licenses, hybrid retailers, packages, food and beverage. So at this point, a cannabis establishment would be zoned as if for any other similar use other than a cannabis establishment would be zoned. And as we discussed before and looked at the provisions for proximity, the drafters intended for the closest similar use to be liquor retail establishments.
So I'd just like to build on that. So I think when you're looking to your local P&Z, and they have the ability not only to prohibit a cannabis establishment at the time being, but when we looked to an earlier slide provided by Mo about the several different types of uses that fall under this, you can also prohibit all of them or just some of them. So if there are certain definitions that your municipality already incorporates into their regulations, it may feel like a natural fit for some of those to be expanded. Certainly there are several municipalities that have a medical dispensary provision. And maybe there are limits on the number of dispensaries or licenses that can be or establishments in that town. Obviously, we know that is not going to be something that can be carried through in the future, so that may require some tweaking. But whether you want to eliminate delivery services, that can be true. If you want to limit food and beverage manufacturing, you have the ability, each town under the statute has flexibility. The statute permits a flexible approach to this. So we see that many towns are either opting out now until they take some time to step back and really educate themselves about this statute, how it fits into their their current regulations and where they want to see it going. Maybe they'll be watching what other maybe smaller municipalities will watch what others do first. There are also restrictions on retail in some municipalities. There are no retail, maybe retail zones. Therefore, it's natural to just say, no, we aren't going to have this use at all. But maybe there are different ways that within your municipality you'll find a way to adopt portions of this law.
That's entirely right. So so at our office, and I'll explain to you why we're doing it. We have been doing this, but our office, we track each municipality and what they are doing or have done with regard to their zoning regulations. And if they're going in the past have had bans or moratoriums, and what they're doing now. As Jackie just stated, and as many of you know, there are towns that allow for dispensaries right now or medical retail, but don't allow for cultivation or production. Or vice versa, or cap the numbers of one or the other. I would say that a broad moratorium without defining, a moratorium on all cannabis businesses, when you don't have any sort of specific like retail zoning regulations, you might be best off to specifically state the licenses that you're going to ban or have a moratorium on. But let's look at what's going on now. So right now we can ban, have a moratorium, permit in a variety of different forms or proximities, the types of cannabis establishments, we being you, the municipalities, that can go into each municipality. So right now, most zoning regulations perhaps talk about dispensary or production licenses, which is what was offered between 2012 and 2020, or this new act in 2021. The zoning language for most municipalities right now is largely silent on these new adult uses. However, there are some municipalities that have already addressed this in advance, and I'll let Jackie speak to it, but there are some municipalities that have said, as far as dispensaries and medical cultivation, we're dealing with it, and they basically say in advance there'll be no adult use or recreational businesses or use permitted, even if there's a change in state law or statute without a special license. Or they basically say even if there's a change in state law or statute, you're still going to need to take some actions with regard to these new, when they drafted it, yet to be defined uses. We now know what they are.
That's right, because even in the OLR report, it said that where a municipality also right to the status, if you take no action through your zoning regulations or ordinances, the establishments that we listed earlier must be zoned as any other similar use would be. So if you don't permit retail use, then certainly you may not have a conflict on a retail use, but if you permit farming, maybe you would have to allow it as a cultivation area. And
just to point that, but just in case anyone's afraid of that, the act does specifically say that I don't remember the specific section off the top of my head, but farming includes a variety of things. Don't be afraid. I think that this specifically is an additive in the act that says it won't include cultivation of cannabis. But Jackie's entirely right. Any generally
just using it as an example. I guess the hybrid example would be a better one, right? That it's like, so for instance, like Stamford, the city of Stamford has existing zoning standards for a medical marijuana dispensary. So that would normally be considered to be the most similar use to a hybrid retail. So zoning for a hybrid retailer arguably should be treated as a medical marijuana dispensary under local zoning until it's otherwise changed.
So to answer any questions about people who have already submitted applications to convert to a hybrid zoning operation, I think Jackie just answered. You got to kind of see what's going to happen with the zoning language and regulation. Hopefully, I think that the presumption is that you will be allowed to continue to operate because the state's going to need people to hold up the industry at the beginning part of it, but you need to see what your municipality wants to do because they have the right to say whether a hybrid retail operation can operate within the municipality borders.
That's right. So it's somewhat ambiguous, and it has to do with interpreting what your local regulation is and how it may be applied with the future uses. So we do have Mo on the line who maybe can give us a little bit more further interpretation of this, but I think that what's most helpful to everyone now too is that you can compare it to a liquor license. So when thinking about, we do want to adopt something, take a look at what your local liquor licensing process looks like, or your local liquor license or liquor zoning regulation would permit. And maybe that's a voluminous section, and maybe it's small, but right now that is the ideal comparison point for, say, retail sales as opposed to a medical marijuana medical dispensary.
So let's also attack some of the regulation stuff. Right now, the Social Equity Committee and other necessary agencies like the DCP are drafting regulations. So as far as the regulations for the application process and so forth, this, as most, I think 11 out of 15 of the Social Equity Committee members has been formed. Once the Social Equity Committee is formed, they will put forth regulations. Once the regulations are put forth, just timeline, then applications can start. I think it's 35 days after they put forth the regulations, applications can start, or 45 days, but that has yet to happen yet. First, the committee's got to form, then they have to draft regulations before we can even start to submit applications, not conversion applications, but new business applications for any of these entities. I think that also questions about what locations would be best, would socioeconomically impacted areas get preference? As Mo answered, the act in the state is not saying where things can go. I do think that the intention of the act and its effect is to help lift up those areas economically, but I don't think that the act has any say as to where it can or can't go. And I can also tell you.
Let me just jump in right there. The governor had a very, very strong preference in drafting the bill that social equity applicants not be required to open a cannabis establishment solely in a disproportionately impacted area. So he does want them to be able to open in any part of the state, and the bill's very clear about that.
Right. So, and just to touch on social equity applicants, so we can put these two things together. A social equity applicant is an individual who makes less than 3 times the mean average income, which is about $200-something thousand on a yearly basis, and either comes from, was born in, or spent the past several years in an impacted area based on arrests and unemployment. So even if you come from one of those areas, what Mo just said is you do not have to open your business in one of those areas. And if you're a zoning official, I guess you don't necessarily need to have one of your residents putting in the applications in your town. Just moving forward, I think that Mo's timeline is very accurate, but I have to tell you from an attorney's point of view, people are chomping at the bit to get going. So I don't know if you're not going to see people for as long as he thinks you're not going to see people for. Let me give you an idea as to sort of what we're telling people right now as far as when they come to us and say we want to put in an application, because I think this will give you as zoning officials an idea of what's going to be coming at you down the pipeline as far as applicants and people in your municipality. So the first thing we're telling people is to look at location. This is largely influenced by license type. So if you're a cultivator and you need 100,000 square foot of indoor warehouse space, you might not want to pick one of the prime locations in Greenwich. You might want to pick a place where you can get a lot of square feet for a cheaper amount. I think that cultivation indoors right now is running something like $400 to $500 a square foot. So it's a lot of money. So license can be influenced by, location can be influenced by license type. The same thing with delivery. You don't need to be in a town to deliver there. And also ownership considerations as far as location and actual location, like who owns the property. We have issues. Remember that state and federal conflict. If the owner of a property has any sort of financing on the property, a mortgage, they have a loan or anything in the mortgage is with a federally insured bank, we're finding that we're having a lot of issues going into those locations. If the owner needs to get sign off from Bank of America or Wells Fargo to put in a cannabis business, there are some issues, and we're seeing that isn't often granted. So there's also ownership considerations. Do you own your location? Do you make sure that the person who owns and that you're going to lease from owns it outright? Then zoning. All licensed applicants by the time, as Mo stated to us, by the time that they get their final approval and license, must be able to provide evidence of all necessary local zoning approval for the establishment and operation. They have to also show or provide evidence that they have the right to possess the land or the property in question. But I think that that's why a lot of our clients are starting to incorporate. They need to incorporate to be able to sign a lease or to finance a piece, whatever they're going to do, and then put in a zoning application, because whose name are they going to put it in? So we're seeing that almost a jump to the third one first, which is the strategic business planning, corporate structure, and business plans.
Because they're probably receiving many calls right now too about what's happening. So I think that's why we've seen this on so many agendas as a discussion item, that we're going to either pause or we will proceed, because it has generated quite a bit of interest. And certainly because there will be a limited number of licenses, it's going to become a competitive sport, I think, between all these municipalities. And I would imagine that something we'll see, Mo and Ben, and for all of you too, something similar to the medical marijuana license applications, where people were part of different organizations, but under a parent company, maybe exploring opportunities in multiple towns at once, hoping that the license is issued in at least one of those municipalities. So it will probably be quite a race once municipalities determine what they will and will not permit, and where they will and will not permit it.
Also keep in mind, because I'm getting this question a lot as zoning officials, the act doesn't limit the amount of licenses or applications for licenses that you can submit. So I have people who are forming business A with me and Joe, and then business B with me and Matt, and they're putting in applications on behalf of both of them. Or they are intending to put in applications on behalf of both of them, or even me and Joe put in 2 applications. I think what the act says is, 1, it limits or it caps the amount of licenses that anybody can hold to 2 on both the cultivation and the retail side. So you can't have more than 2 retail licenses or 2 cultivation licenses, which also just means that a Curaleaf or some of these big companies that are already in existence, they aren't going to be able to go for more and expand their footprint because we have caps. But
caps on how many can be issued, but not on how many can be applied for. So everyone will probably throw many applications in an attempt to achieve 1 or 2.
And to explain
that's the expectation.
The practical side of things, Mo talked about the phasing. It's not that expensive. Connecticut did a brilliant job in phasing this out. Very good job on drafting, in that it's a nominal amount to put in your application, $250, $1,000, depending on the license type. Once you're granted a provisional license, there's another payment, but then you have 14 months to get everything squared away. It's that period of time when you might be on a lease or paying for property and you're not even able to open. So the state of Connecticut has given us a limited but reasonable amount of time for these companies to get everything in order, to get business plans, right to use, zoning approval, all the necessaries, labor agreements, and so on and so forth before the final application, which is a much bigger cost, but at least the initial upfront is minimal. So I do think that there are going to be people who are going to try and submit multiple applications to get multiple, I guess, bites at the apple is how it's said. I guess the other thing to just generally explain is how licenses are going to be offered. Other than the conversions is the lottery system. We don't know how long that'll last, but the lottery system will divide the licenses into the first half and the second half. The first 50% of the licenses will go strictly to the individuals who qualify as social equity applicants. And if social equity applicants don't get, they don't win the lottery during the first 50%, they actually get rolled into the second 50% for another chance. So we're seeing a lot of people who are trying to create a social equity compliant company, talking about the corporate structure part of this. That's a very big consideration for them as well. And then lastly, funding. You need money. You're going to need a decent amount of money to operate these sort of undertakings. I think I just gave you an idea of the cultivation side of things. They're typically somewhere between $2 and $5 million for an indoor grow operation. Right now, we're not allowing. Mo, please confirm, we're not allowing outdoor growing of cannabis in Connecticut, correct?
The law allows the Department of Consumer Protection to promulgate regulations for outdoor grow. That is certainly something that is likely to come down the pike, not in the short term. I would imagine 2 to 3 years out, frankly.
But to give all you officials some sort of idea of what the difference is, again, I think it's about $400 a square foot for indoor grow, $14 a square foot for outdoor grow. So I like most of there will be regulations that will probably come down the line, but not yet. But that's also something to consider as far as cultivation and cultivation sites. But funding is what you're going to need to get off the ground. It's about $250,000 to $2 million to open a retail establishment. So that's the next side of things. And, you know, where are people going to go? Whether it's, well, that's not part of this. It's not part of this talk, but they're going to have to find funding somewhere. So that's a big part of getting things off the ground. So this is why I think that people are going to start looking to the zoning and planning boards, perhaps a lot sooner than even 2022, because they're going to want to start getting this stuff in line. Now, the other sort of thing that we're telling clients, go ahead, Jackie.
No, I think that's important. So we're talking about all these calls that we're going to get, and there's a couple questions that have come in that I think are lateral questions to that point, and it has to do with 148B3, and it's about the and I think that Mo might be able to help us. The question is the reading of the act that a municipality is limited to only those uses in section 148B3 for proximity buffers. So we talked about this very quickly at the beginning, that 148B3, that goes to that you could, the zoning officer, the P&Z can place reasonable restrictions on the hours and operation of signage or restrict the proximity of a cannabis establishment to the following uses. And I think that's church, public or parochial school, convent, charitable institution, whether supported by private or public funds, hospitals, camp, barracks, armed forces areas. And I wondered if you can speak to that, Mo. Is that an exhaustive list? Is that just an example?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jackie. That's an example. That section went through, that subsection went through multiple rounds of rewriting. And at one point, it was written to require it. And then we got some pushback when some towns were like, well, you know, like there may be a freeway between a school and a dispensary. And then is a dispensary really, you know, it's within 500 feet, but it's kind of not in the same neighborhood. And so, so we put that in as an example of we do, you know, we would kind of suggest municipalities that those be, you know, at a minimum the kinds of areas around which you put some kind of buffer, but we didn't want to leave the discretion to the towns. And this is not an exhaustive list in 148B.
That's really helpful, because also that is a great piece of guidance when you're thinking about a special permit application, because under a special permit application, as opposed to as of right, a municipality has the ability to use its discretion in determining if a site is appropriate. I once faced a medical license that where a public building or a state-owned building, you could not have a dispensary within a certain number of feet, whatever that buffer was, I don't recall. And there was at the edge of a highway, a nice site, and then there was a salt storage facility, for instance. And so that's not something that's frequented by the public, like let's say a town hall is, or maybe a passport office is, and that may be something that would be under a special permit criteria, able to give a town flexibility to say that this would not be offensive to the people in our community, but while still within that. So having that flexibility was very important. Thank you for that clarification.
And just to answer another question as I'm reading through them, section 83, as far as public referendum, says at least 60 days before the date of a regular election, not within 60 days. So at least 80 days, at least 60 days or over 60 days for anyone who asked that question. Also, as far as consumption and regulation of consumption, I think Mo touched on this. Yes, actually, I should say one thing because it was a little bit confusing to me. Consumption is not smoking. I saw one of the provisions of the Hotel Act that says that you can consume in a hotel but not smoke in a hotel, and I had to wrap my mind around it. So edibles and other forms of non-smoking consumption can be permitted. where smoking consumption may not be, just to distinguish that. Secondly, as Mo pointed out, there is the Clean Air Act, which is a state law. That's the law that says, when you can and can't smoke in restaurants and tobacco shops and, certain stores that were in existence prior to, I think it was 2013 or whatever the date was. So that is another regulation that would apply it's incorporated and referenced within the body of the act if you were to look at it, but it is a separate standard for permissive smoking where you can and cannot smoke. Let's see
What about the sale? This is another good question, and we're jumping around, but in the interest of time, I think we should. And Mo, you may want to answer this one. Since the sale of cannabis is not currently legal at this moment, how can local zoning issue approval for an illegal activity? Would the answer be that it is, you can issue it for dependent on when that date comes?
Yeah, I mean, the zoning authorizations to say that the act of selling cannabis should not happen before DCP opens the market, right? So the zoning can be approved, but certain activities can't take place at that location prior to the state allowing it. And frankly,
would a local municipality or would a zoning enforcement officer be protected because while they are giving the ability to have it in that location in the future, their act of signing off on it is a condition precedent to the license being issued, and the license won't be issued until the law allows.
Exactly. That's right.
And also just note that the law itself provides a lot of protections for people who are involved in the cannabis industry, basically saying that you cannot be criminally prosecuted or held responsible because you're participating in the cannabis industry. It also talks about contracts regarding to the cannabis industry being enforceable because they would have otherwise been illegal contracts. It talks about, just to give you guys other solace, no state, municipal, police, or law enforcement entity can expend any resources for a use of cannabis that complies with our act, but is in violation of federal act. So we're really trying to make things clear here within the state. And I'll even get into a couple things I thought were relevant for licensed professionals as we carry on here. So moving on, and I think we're going to cover a bunch of the questions that were asked, and I'll continue to run through them. Oh, just very quickly, the permitting thing. Again, I want to clarify that does not apply to hybrid retailers or cultivators, meaning large scale, massive square footage undertakings. It's just retailers, which is adult use sales only, no medical, and micro cultivation, which is growing and then also being able to dispense or I guess sell it. The provisions limiting those, I think, were in 143 E through G, talking about caps per 25,000 residents within a municipality. Let's talk about a couple other land use considerations, marketing considerations, exterior building considerations. You can't advertising and marketing. First of all, because cannabis is limited to individuals over the age of 21, we have all sorts of cool restrictions for any sort of external advertising and marketing, whether it's stuff that's being given out by a dispensary or even the bus stop next to the dispensary, if we're talking about land use. So advertising can't be targeted to individuals who are under 21 years of age. That's even with entertainment sponsors, cartoons, or any sort of activities. We want to keep this away from being attractive to people under the age of 21. Engaging by advertising by television, radio, internet, mobile applications, where you're not sure that at least 90% of the audience is over 21 is not permitted. There also has to be, although this isn't land use, so I didn't include it, all of those opt out, check the box if you're over 21 years of age before you go on to anything, before you can access anything if we were talking about marketing or internet stuff. Advertising cannabis products or paraphernalia in any physical form visible to the public within 500 feet of an elementary school. So again, this is what is visible from the store. There was a question about limiting distances, and that distances were not necessarily limited, but advertising was. This is literally what you can show in the window. So if you drive around and look at these places, dispensaries right now, Most of them have the grayed out windows, the smoked out windows, and no signage. You don't see what they're selling in the windows to make it attractive to anybody. I think that's the idea here, both for not enticing people who shouldn't be using it and security purposes, is to keep the advertising and any visible products, paraphernalia, advertisements, including, I would assume, brand names, flashing lights, or anything like that. Continuing on, this is both in the Cannabis Act and then in certain pharmaceutical regs, also controlled by the DCP. No entity other than a licensed entity can use certain words or phrases within or outside upon the premises, including the word dispensary. I know I drive around and there are a lot of CBD dispensary signs in our neck of the woods. That's a no-no. That's not necessarily land use, but that's something to keep in mind. Drugstore, pharmacy, apothecary, drug or drug medicine shop. I had a client with a pharmacy, F-A-R-M-A-C-Y. That's an issue. Advertise on public or private vehicles. Here's a land use one: taxi stands, bus stops, or anything like that, unless it's actually owned by the cannabis establishment, which is strange to me because we have one with Curaleaf's name on it here in Stamford, so I don't know if they own that. But that's just something to keep in mind in your local municipalities. And then lastly, you can't show it to anybody who can pass by. And this is separate and aside from the distance from schools. You can't display cannabis or cannabis products so that's clearly visible to a person from the exterior of the facility. Display any signs or printed material advertising a brand or any particular product. Okay, so that's why when you look at these places, there's no flashing neon lights, and that should all be part of hopefully what they're telling you as part of their intended use, because that is not allowed under the Act. Window displays. No cannabis establishment shall display cannabis or cannabis products in any way that's visible from the public right of way.
Ben,
Yes.
someone just asked a question about something you just answered. They said, so on-site signage is considered advertising and therefore on-site signage is controlled by the bill. Can you clarify that based on what you just said?
I think that on-site signage that says the name of the dispensary, I think would be permitted, but anything else as far as this brand, this product, this,
Right. The name of the facility, Ben's Place can be on there, but you can't list the sub products that you are selling there.
right, sale today on, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
No, none of that. None of that. That's entirely right. Which also makes it interesting for what it's worth. In Stamford, we have a dispensary in a strip mall, and there's been a paraphernalia store that wants to go next door. But if you look at the actual regulations, I think that a strip mall is all considered one building. So a paraphernalia next door with a big window that has, stuff, I think would actually, because it's in the same building and literally the window over, could be an issue. So also, I guess, just keep that sort of stuff in mind. Freestanding building with a paraphernalia, a smoke shop, 2 stores down the block could be fine. But I was looking for a client, 2 places within the same strip mall, and it looked like they were going to have some issues because they wanted to obviously such and such smoke shop, and these are the products that we have, and that would have been a problem. The landlord for the dispensary, which is what it is now, prohibited them from coming in, saying that the regs prohibited it. Use of tax revenue. We've talked about the 3% local municipal tax. I think that the $5 million per retail shop is modest. I think particularly if we open up before New York State and any border town, I think it's going to be very modest. So what's going to happen with the taxes once they collect it? I think this is just for your reference, but it's going to be used for everything from A to F here to improve streetscapes and neighborhood developments, fund education programs, mental health and addiction services, youth services bureaus, promote civic engagement in communities. That is in the section of the Act that talks about tax, which is section 126B5, but that gives you an idea of if you're going to be collecting this, what expected, a couple $100,000 or $100,000 tax, what's going to happen with it? It looks like good stuff. Couple other things, and then I'll look at some of the questions, but just to give you an idea of things coming down the line home grow, it's not necessarily related, but it is related in that people will not be going to dispensaries and using their homes, or I should say retail establishments. Effective October 1, qualifying patients of the Palliative Use of Marijuana Act can cultivate up to 3 mature cannabis plants. Not until 2023 can the public at large consider that. So that is one other fun part about the act. Licensed professionals, and this goes for a variety of different professionals, employers, landlords and tenants, students. This is part of those protections that we are talking about. But except when required by federal law, and I know I'm a licensed professional, but no state or entity shall deny any professional license because of any affiliation with a cannabis establishment, possession or use of cannabis, legal cannabis, or cannabis possession or use or conviction for less than 4 ounces. There's all sorts of other stuff in here, such as expungement, changes to the penal code. As far as effective dates, the one, as Mo touched on, the immediately effective stuff is a lot of this discrimination, adverse action language for employers, and the penal code, what you can and cannot be stopped for, arrested for, what you can do in the privacy of your own home, etc. Those are a lot of the July 1, 2021 effective date activities. As we said, as far as licensing, we have to have a social equity commission established. They have to draft regulations, whereupon they'll say we're starting to take applications, and then we can start to submit applications. So just a quick comparative analysis, because everyone asks me, what are we thinking about numbers? What are the total numbers here? Well, we said we can't tell you what the total numbers per town are unless we're talking micro cultivation or retail. So the next question becomes, what are things going to look like? And this is not from the state. This is not from the governor's office. Just a little bit of a disclaimer. This is my looking at Wikipedia and looking at statistics. But we're about half the size of Massachusetts, both in population and municipalities. Massachusetts is a commonwealth, so they have a variety of different towns and cities. But I just met, I think I said, with the commissioner of the Massachusetts Cannabis Commission, and he gave me these numbers. He said that right now, 124 of their towns and cities have banned cannabis businesses. 188 towns and cities allow cannabis, which leaves the remaining 39 pending or planning, whether it's through a moratorium or they just haven't decided yet. As far as numbers, Massachusetts currently has 146 retail stores, and they were sort of hoping to have more than that by now, and 40 cultivators, both indoors and outdoors. So, you know, we have no idea where we're going to end up in the state, although we do know that right now we have 18 dispensaries and 4 cultivation sites. So that's where we stand now. And, you know, the future is sort of the next frontier. Just lastly, and this is an attorney ethical opinion, but I thought that y'all should know that it's being considered, and then we'll jump into some questions. Both the bar associations, the American Planning Association, I know that people are addressing this, so I just pulled the ethical opinion from the Connecticut Bar Association, which basically says it's our opinion that attorneys may advise clients of the requirements of, this is PUMA, but it will soon be the Responsible Use of Marijuana Act. We can't assist clients in conduct that's in violation of federal law, but we need to let them know what does violate and what doesn't, and we provide them guidance to not cross that line. So as attorneys, let me just tell you, land use folks, we love regulation, and we love clear regulation because it allows us to give better advice to our clients. So the clearer the regulations can be, the more the regulations there are. I don't know if you believe it or not, but we like that because it helps us to give clear and more exact advice to our clients, who right now I'm saying we don't have any real regulations, so we don't know exactly how things are going to look in the future. So
on that note, because this is kind of across the board, there's questions about best practices for different parts of this bill that has to do with signage, that has to do with public safety. I've seen a few of those come in, and Mo and I were discussing this before the meeting started.
And what did you say? It was called constitutional best practices. And I think that same can apply to you and your zoning offices, and also to your commissions and board, whether those are constitutional best practices or also your local best practices. I would encourage you, as you start to think through what a regulation looks like, to confer with your town attorneys on that. When we think about signage, certainly the First Amendment regulates signage and covers signage. So if you put a marijuana leaf on your sign, and someone wanted to regulate that, could they? Maybe, maybe not. But if you're selling marijuana there, it might be allowed. If you are not selling a marijuana product, you're selling a CBD product, perhaps that would be misleading and could otherwise be regulated. I think that you have to think through who the applicant is, what you've historically done for all uses in your town. What do you permit at liquor stores? Things to think through that. Or for best practices for public safety concerns, how have you dealt with other similar special permit exactions? Usually that requires some type of a traffic report or a report from your local traffic and parking authority. So if something opens, I think it needs to be a real concern, not necessarily a perceived concern. And if you are issuing a special permit, it may be appropriate to put in a condition that says, let's say you do have a perceived parking concern on your site. We know that this happened in Massachusetts in a few places, that you put in a condition that says, should any issues arise, the applicant shall work with the traffic and parking authority to take corrective action. You could handle it that way. And what really the purpose of that section in this law is to be expressed and let a municipality know that the state's aware that these things may happen and that there are tools that they would encourage you or support you in pursuing with an applicant. And that is one example of it, that they give you a cap on this much money can be donated to solving that problem. So that the words that Mo had suggested to me, I think are good ones for you to take away and take back to your offices and your boards, and just think of what your best practices are. And I'm sure with CAZEO and CCAPA, they are so wonderful at putting on continued programming, as they did throughout, as they've done historically and also throughout during the state of emergency, about how to put those best practices into work. So I think this is a good starting point, but I know that you'll probably all engage in some of the even harder work from here on in, and I look forward to being part of those discussions as well.
I guess one of the last things I would just point out for clarity's sake is, to get a license for one of these new cannabis enterprises, you have to apply for a license unless you're converting. So if you're a cottage if you have a cottage food production license, or you're for example, a hemp farmer through the Department of Connecticut Agriculture, just know as zoning officials, those licenses don't automatically transfer into a cannabis license. We just had a question on that. So hemp farmers are hemp farmers, cannabis farmers are cannabis farmers, and there the twain shall convert. Same thing with someone who owns a kitchen. You don't convert that to a food and beverage license. You have to apply for one. So just sort of keep that in mind as people come to you with pre-existing uses. They do have to apply for the license to be able to get it. As far as them signing a lease or asking for zoning variances or special applications now before the license application, we have clients that are starting to look into that now. So they can't, if they want to start paying on a lease now before they put in a license application, they can. The one thing we're telling them is, if you get a variance or you change your zoning location and you're not the first person to get your license, you've just done it for the person that comes before you, or so forth and so on. So you should see more. You should see more of us in the future. And thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, Mo, for all the great information. And just thanks for the planners for putting this on.
Okay, so we're running a little bit over, and what I want to point out is that there was a lot of Q&A going on, and Jackie and Mo were outstanding Ironmen and women responding to questions on the fly. I've confirmed with Joel from Robinson & Cole, who's helping to manage this session, that the Q&A will be, we can pull that out as a separate document, so all of the questions that were posed throughout this session, when we post the links to the session, we can also post that document. So people can go back and if you had questions, see that they were responded. So We'll probably end it there with another huge thank you to all of the work and presentations from Ben and Jackie and Mo. And again, thank you to Evan and Joel from Robinson and Cole for hosting the session and managing. Thank you to CCAPA and CAZEO for co-hosting. And again, this is all brand new. We're just getting started in this world, and there'll be lots of opportunity to learn from each other as we proceed. So thank you all for attending, and have a terrific afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
For having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.